Hi, I'm Dr. Craig Malkin, clinical psychologist and lecturer for Harvard Medical School. I'm also the author of Rethinking Narcissism, which is devoted to helping you understand and cope with narcissism in all its forms in all your relationships. I want to resume where I left off in my last video, and that is talking about echoism. Uh, I want to help people who are survivors of abuse and neglect, particularly with narcissistic parents or narcissistic partners. And you can go back and find out more about echoism. It's a term I popularized in my 2015 book, Rethinking Narcissism. And one of the things that I did in the process of developing the concept of echoism further is I developed a measure for it. You can take that measure in my book to see where you fall along the lines of echoism, which you want to think of as a trait, not a diagnosis. And there's also a brief version on my website, drcraigmalkin.com, that you can take as well. But briefly, echoism you want to think of as a fear of seeming narcissistic in any way, a fear of becoming a burden, a feeling of having to rein oneself in order to stay connected and survive in relationships. That's how you want to think about echoism. But this could apply to people who don't struggle with echoism, just people who are trying to survive abuse and neglect. I want to talk about the number one pitfall that many of us, and this included myself, uh, are prone to when we're trying to extract ourselves from a relationship with somebody who's narcissistic or and otherwise difficult, especially if we struggle with echoism. And that's what I call the figuring out response. Now, the figuring out response might be familiar to you already. If you have ever spent hours on YouTube or researching articles, including my own, I hope you like mine and I hope you like my videos. But if you ever spent hours looking for answers to the question, is my partner a narcissist? What are the signs of narcissism? Could they possibly have NPD? And you've gone down that rabbit hole, you've succumbed or fallen into the figuring out response, which is a coping strategy. Now, don't get me wrong, there's lots of great things about being able to bring that kind of energy to research and figure things out. I mean, if you're struggling and you're not feeling good, if you're having symptoms, or if you're having other problems, getting as much information as you can is extremely, extremely helpful. But like any strategy, the figuring out response, when it's applied to the wrong situation or it's distracting us from something else that would be helpful for us to focus on, can work against us. As I tell clients that I work with, anything that can be used adaptively can also be used defensively. That is to cut us off from experience, to help us avoid feelings or senses of self that we weren't allowed to have. And the figuring out response is no exception to that rule. Where it comes from, most people who, when they're in a difficult relationship or with somebody who's extremely narcissistic, who wind up going down that rabbit hole, which I want to help you stop doing, um, they've grown up in an environment where whenever their dad yelled at them or their mother was nasty in some way or a parent or a relative was hurtful, they might have heard something like I did along the lines of, he's just had a really hard day. You have to understand he works really hard at work, or he's just really stressed right now. I promise you he really loves you. Well, as well-meaning as all of that sounds, of course, what it does is it distracts us from the fact that our needs aren't getting met and that we are unhappy. And it distracts us from being able to really tune into what would help with that or even receive help from that. So that can actually carry forward into adult life, where in those kinds of upsetting situations, we now ourselves go to the figuring out response instead of just really recognizing that shouldn't happen, or I don't like that, or my needs aren't being met. Now, I'm going to throw this into very clear relief so that you can also recognize yourself, why this is such a problem. And that is, if you were witnessing your son or your daughter, or your young son or daughter, or someone you cared about and loved, and they were being hurt, your first response would likely not be, why do you think they're doing that? Or maybe they've just had a hard day. or maybe you just need to understand what they're feeling right now and be more sensitive, right? You wouldn't say that. And that's how we know this is an old learned coping strategy. It's something you had to do in order to stay connected to somebody who was difficult in this way, whether they were narcissistic or just abusive or neglectful. And now it's something that you end up employing for yourself in order to deal with that situation. But you would never say that to your child. And with good reason, because what you would probably say instead is something along the lines of, I'm so sorry, sweetheart. It's really upsetting when our friends treat us that way. And I can understand why you would feel upset right now. And I'm sorry he did that. Because nobody deserves to be uh, the target of somebody else's mood, no matter, even if they've had a hard day. Nobody should have to try to think about why they're in that state of mind. None of us should ever have had to learn to figure out another person's state of mind in order to get our needs met and in order to feel better in a relationship. But that's what echoism, that is echoing needs of and feelings of others, is all about. And that's certainly what the figuring out response is. So what should we do instead? Well, let's go back to that situation where if you imagined it was somebody like your own son or daughter, and I want you to put yourself in that situation really vividly. This part's important. It took deeply felt experiences to set up these patterns, like the figuring out response. It'll take deeply felt experiences to change them. So just try to really vividly imagine what you would say to your child and how they would feel hearing it. I mean, they would feel supported, right? They would feel understood. They would feel like you care. This activates our awareness that what we need is needs for connection, caring, support in those difficult moments. And to the extent that we're focused on what is going on with another person, even if it starts out in a way that feels like it's useful to us, that is what's going on with them, that whole big question, to the extent that we're focusing on what's going on in their mind instead of what we're feeling and what we're needing and maybe not getting, then we are distracted from ourselves. And that is a common pitfall. But if you imagine and really feel what it's like to just be in an interaction where you're saying instead, I'm sorry, I know that hurt, and really feel what it's like for your child, and just bring that to yourself, then you can start to leave behind the old strategy you were forced to use to have a relationship with somebody who's extremely narcissistic and get clearer about what your needs are and what you're feeling inside. And there's no easier, quicker way to start to move away from getting caught up in what does this other person need and getting much clearer about what you yourself need. And that's so important to overcoming echoism and even figuring out how to cope differently in a relationship for yourself. This is, I want to emphasize that again and again. This is why I'm spending more time focusing on survivors. There's a lot of great work out there about narcissism and what narcissism looks like, and I will continue to share that as well. I want to also help you start to bring it back to your own experience, because that's the best way to be clear about what you need going forward. And that's really important in overcoming these patterns. So I hope you found that helpful. I look forward to sharing more with you. If you like it, give it a big thumbs up and subscribe, and please leave comments because they often prompt me to share these videos. Thanks so much, and I look forward to seeing you again.